The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Hells Angels clubhouse in Oakland, California. Inside the kitchen, Maria Santos worked quietly, preparing breakfast for the members who would soon arrive. She had been cooking for the motorcycle club for 3 years, and her reputation for making the best scrambled eggs and bacon in the county kept her job secure. Big Mike, the chapter president, walked into the kitchen around 7:30 that Tuesday morning. His heavy boots echoed against the concrete floor as he approached the stove where Maria stood with her back turned. He was a mountain of a man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with arms covered in tattoos that told stories of his life on the road. "Morning, Maria," he said in his deep voice, reaching for a cup of coffee from the pot she always kept fresh. When Maria turned to greet him, Big Mike noticed something that made him stop mid-sip. Around her lips were small dark marks that looked like bruises. They weren't there yesterday, and they certainly weren't the kind of marks that came from kitchen accidents. "What happened to your face?" he asked, setting his coffee cup down harder than intended. Maria's hand instinctively went to her mouth and she looked away quickly. "Nothing, just clumsy in the kitchen," she mumbled, turning back to the stove. But Big Mike had seen enough bruises in his life to know the difference between an accident and something else entirely. These marks were too precise, too deliberate. Someone had hurt Maria, and that someone was going to answer for it. The other members started filtering into the kitchen for breakfast, but Big Mike couldn't focus on anything except those marks on Maria's face. He watched her throughout the morning, noticing how she flinched when anyone moved too quickly near her, how she kept touching her lips unconsciously. Maria had always been more than just their cook. She was like family to many of the members. She remembered their birthdays, asked about their kids, and made sure they ate properly when they spent long days at the clubhouse. Her kindness had earned her respect and protection from the entire chapter. During breakfast, Big Mike pulled aside Tommy, his vice president, and pointed toward Maria. Tommy's jaw tightened when he saw what Big Mike was talking about. Both men had daughters, and the sight of a woman being hurt hit them in a place that had nothing to do with their tough exterior. "We need to find out what happened," Tommy whispered. Big Mike nodded, his mind already working on a plan. But first he needed Maria to trust him enough to tell the truth. He knew she was scared, probably threatened not to tell anyone. That's how these things usually worked. As the breakfast crowd thinned out, Big Mike stayed behind, helping Maria clean up the dishes. This was unusual behavior for a club president, but Maria didn't question it. She appreciated any help she could get. "Maria," he said gently, drying a plate with a dish rag. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" She nodded but didn't look at him. "Those marks on your face," he continued, "they're not from the kitchen. Someone hurt you." Maria's hand stopped moving in the soapy water. For a moment, Big Mike thought she might open up, but then she shook her head firmly. "I told you I'm just clumsy." Big Mike set down the plate and turned to face her fully. "Maria, I've been around violence my whole life. I know what it looks like, and I know you're scared, but you don't have to be scared anymore." Tears started forming in Maria's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, leaving soap suds on her cheek. "If I tell you," she whispered, "it'll only make things worse." "No," Big Mike said firmly. "It won't. I promise you that." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of motorcycles starting up outside. Maria looked at this intimidating man who was being so gentle with her, and something inside her began to crack. "It's my boyfriend, Carlos," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "He gets angry when I work late here. Says I'm probably doing things with you guys. Last night he grabbed my face and squeezed really hard." Big Mike's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice calm. "Where does Carlos live?" "Please don't do anything," Maria begged. "He said if I ever told anyone, he'd make sure I never worked anywhere again. He knows people." Big Mike placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Maria, Carlos made a big mistake when he put his hands on you. You're under our protection now." Big Mike spent the rest of that Tuesday gathering information about Carlos Mendez. It didn't take long for the Hells Angels network to provide a complete picture of Maria's boyfriend. Carlos worked at an auto repair shop downtown and had a reputation for being hot-tempered with a history of bar fights. By evening, Big Mike had Carlos's address, work schedule, and even knew what kind of car he drove. But instead of rushing into action, he decided to observe first. This wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure Maria would be safe permanently. The next morning, Big Mike arrived at the clubhouse earlier than usual. Maria was already in the kitchen, but today she wore more makeup than normal, clearly trying to cover the marks that had darkened overnight. She moved carefully like someone nursing hidden bruises. "Good morning," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "Morning, Maria. How are you feeling today?" She shrugged, focusing intently on cracking eggs into a bowl, same as always. But Big Mike could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands shook slightly as she worked. Carlos had done more damage than just the marks on her face. Around noon, Big Mike got a call from Razor, one of the younger members who had been watching Carlos's workplace. "He just left for lunch," Razor reported. "Drives like a maniac and almost hit an old lady in the crosswalk." This detail told Big Mike everything he needed to know about Carlos's character. A man who would risk hurting innocent people while driving was the same kind of man who would hurt a woman like Maria. That afternoon, Big Mike made an unexpected decision. Instead of confronting Carlos directly, he drove to the local police station. This surprised even Tommy, who had assumed they would handle the situation their own way. "You sure about this, Mike?" Tommy asked as they sat in the police parking lot. "Maria needs this done right," Big Mike replied. "If we just scare him off, he might come back worse. If we hurt him, Maria might get blamed. But if the law handles it properly, she'll have real protection." Inside the police station, Big Mike asked to speak with Detective Rivera, a woman he had dealt with before during various community issues. Detective Rivera was surprised to see the Hells Angels president in her office, but she listened carefully as he explained the situation. "You're asking me to investigate domestic violence?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm asking you to help a good woman who's being hurt by a bad man," Big Mike replied simply. Detective Rivera studied him for a moment. "Why not handle this your own way? That's usually how things work with your organization." Big Mike leaned forward in his chair. "Because Maria deserves better than vigilante justice. She deserves real protection, the kind that comes with paperwork and court orders." The detective agreed to look into the situation, but she needed Maria to file a formal complaint. Big Mike knew this would be the hardest part. When he returned to the clubhouse, he found Maria cleaning the kitchen after the dinner rush. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like every action caused her pain. "Maria, I need to talk to you about something important," he said, sitting down at the counter. She looked nervous immediately. "Did you do something to Carlos? Because if you did, he'll know it was me who told you." "I didn't touch Carlos," Big Mike assured her, "but I did talk to a police detective who wants to help you." Maria's face went pale. No. You don't understand. Carlos has friends who work with the police. If I file a report, word will get back to him." "Not this detective," Big Mike said firmly. "Detective Rivera is someone I trust. She's helped people in situations like yours before." Maria shook her head frantically. "You don't know Carlos. If he even thinks I talked to the police, he'll do worse than grab my face." Big Mike stood up and walked around the counter to face Maria directly. "What if I told you that Carlos would never be able to hurt you again? What if I promised you that?" "How can you promise that?" she asked, tears starting to flow. "Because Detective Rivera doesn't just arrest people, Maria. She builds cases that put them away for a long time. And while she's building that case, you'll have protection." Maria wiped her eyes with a kitchen towel. "What kind of protection?" "The kind that follows you home every night. The kind that makes sure Carlos knows that if he even looks at you wrong, he'll have bigger problems than he can imagine." For the first time since Big Mike had discovered her injuries, Maria looked hopeful. "You really think the police can stop him?" "I think Detective Rivera can stop him," Big Mike corrected. "But she needs your help to do it right." Maria was quiet for several minutes, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Okay, but if this goes wrong, if Carlos hurts me worse because of this..." "If Carlos hurts you worse because of this," Big Mike interrupted, "then we'll forget about doing things the legal way." The next morning, Big Mike drove Maria to the police station himself. Detective Rivera met them in a private room and spent 2 hours taking Maria's statement. She photographed the bruises, documented the threats, and explained the process of getting a restraining order. "This is just the beginning," Detective Rivera told Maria as they finished. "Carlos will be served with papers tomorrow and he'll know you filed a complaint. Are you prepared for that?" Maria looked at Big Mike, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice shook slightly. As they left the police station, Big Mike's phone rang. It was Razor again. "Mike, you need to know something. Carlos just got fired from his job. Word is he went ballistic on his boss this morning." Big Mike felt a chill run down his spine. An angry, unemployed Carlos was going to be even more dangerous than before. The restraining order was served to Carlos Mendez at 3:15 on Thursday afternoon, while he sat drinking beer at Murphy's Bar downtown. The process server later described Carlos's reaction as explosive, saying the man crumpled up the papers and threw them across the bar while screaming threats that made other customers uncomfortable. Big Mike received this information from Detective Rivera within an hour. She had asked the process server to report back immediately, knowing that the most dangerous time for domestic violence victims is often right after legal action is taken. "We need to be extra careful for the next few days," Detective Rivera told Big Mike over the phone. "Men like Carlos don't handle being challenged well, especially publicly." At the clubhouse, Maria tried to maintain her normal routine, but everyone could see she was terrified. Her hands shook as she prepared dinner, and she jumped every time the front door opened. Big Mike had quietly arranged for members to escort her to and from work, though he didn't tell her about this protection detail. Around 7 that evening, Carlos showed up at the clubhouse. He parked his beat-up Camaro across the street and sat there for nearly an hour, just watching the building. Several members noticed him, but Big Mike had given strict orders: observe and report, but don't engage unless Carlos actually approached the property. "He's just sitting there, staring," Razor reported to Big Mike. "Want me to go have a conversation with him?" "No," Big Mike said firmly. "We do this by the book. If he violates the restraining order by coming onto the property or trying to contact Maria, we call Detective Rivera immediately." But Carlos was smarter than they gave him credit for. He stayed just beyond the legal boundary of the restraining order, making his presence known without technically breaking the law. Maria noticed the car when she looked out the kitchen window. The color drained from her face immediately. "He's out there," she whispered to Big Mike. "He's watching me." Big Mike looked out the window and saw Carlos still sitting in his car. "He can't come near you, Maria. The restraining order makes sure of that." "You don't understand," Maria said, her voice rising with panic. "He doesn't care about restraining orders. He's planning something." That night, Big Mike personally drove Maria home to her small apartment across town. As they pulled into her parking lot, she grabbed his arm. "What if he's waiting inside?" she asked. Big Mike had already thought of this possibility. "Tommy's been watching your place since this afternoon. It's been quiet." But as they approached Maria's apartment door, they both noticed something that made their blood run cold. The door was slightly open and the wood around the lock was splintered. "Stay behind me," Big Mike instructed, pulling out his phone to call 911. The apartment had been ransacked. Furniture was overturned, dishes were broken, and Maria's clothes were scattered everywhere. But the most disturbing discovery was in the bedroom, where Carlos had spray-painted "You can't hide from me" in red letters across the white wall. Detective Rivera arrived within minutes of the police call. She walked through the apartment, photographing the damage and documenting everything carefully. "This is a clear violation of the restraining order," she told Maria. "Breaking and entering, vandalism, intimidation. We can arrest him tonight." But when police went to Carlos's apartment, he wasn't there. His neighbors said they hadn't seen him since earlier that day, and his car was nowhere to be found. "He's running," Detective Rivera explained. "Or he's planning something bigger." Big Mike made a decision that night that would change everything. "Maria, you're not staying alone anymore. You're coming back to the clubhouse." "I can't live at a motorcycle club," Maria protested. "You can and you will," Big Mike said firmly. "We have a spare room upstairs. It's got a lock on the door and windows that don't face the street. You'll be safe there." Detective Rivera nodded approvingly. "That's actually a good idea. Carlos won't try anything at the clubhouse." But Detective Rivera was wrong about Carlos. He was beyond rational thinking now. The restraining order, the job loss, and Maria's defiance had pushed him into a dangerous mental state, where consequences no longer mattered. The next morning, Carlos called the clubhouse phone at 6 a.m. Maria answered because she was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. "I know you're there." Carlos's voice came through the phone, slurred and angry. "You think your biker friends can protect you? But they can't watch you every second of every day." Maria hung up immediately and ran to find Big Mike. When she told him about the call, his face hardened into an expression that made her step back. That was his second mistake, Big Mike said quietly. What was his first? Maria asked. Putting his hands on you. Big Mike called Detective Rivera to report the phone threat, but he also made another call to Tommy. Get everyone here. We need to have a meeting. Within an hour, 12 Hells Angels members were gathered in the clubhouse's main room. Big Mike explained the situation to those who didn't already know the details. Carlos Mendez has threatened one of our own, he said simply. He's broken into her home and terrorized her. The police are doing their job, but they can't be everywhere at once. Snake, one of the older members, spoke up. What do you need from us, Mike? I need Carlos to understand that his war isn't just with Maria anymore, Big Mike replied. It's with all of us. The plan they developed was simple but effective. Every member would take turns watching Carlos's known hangouts. When he was spotted, they would follow him at a distance, making sure he knew he was being watched. No violence, no direct confrontation, just a constant reminder that he was outnumbered and outmatched. But Carlos had his own plan, and it was far more dangerous than anyone imagined. While the Hells Angels were organizing their surveillance, Carlos was buying gasoline and making Molotov cocktails in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He had decided that if he couldn't have Maria, nobody would. Saturday evening brought an unexpected twist to the dangerous game Carlos was playing. While Big Mike and his crew maintained their surveillance, Detective Rivera received a tip from an informant about Carlos buying suspicious materials at a hardware store. The store's security cameras showed him purchasing rope, duct tape, and several containers of gasoline. This has escalated beyond domestic violence, Detective Rivera told Big Mike during an emergency phone call. We're looking at potential arson, maybe worse. At the clubhouse, Maria was helping prepare dinner for the members when Detective Rivera arrived with backup officers. The sight of police cars in the parking lot made her panic. What's happening? She asked Big Mike as he met the detective at the door. Carlos is planning something big, he told her honestly. Detective Rivera thinks he might try to burn down the clubhouse. Maria's face went white. With all of you inside? He's lost all sense of reason, Detective Rivera explained. The materials he bought, combined with his escalating threats, suggest he's planning a major attack. Big Mike gathered his members in the main room, while Detective Rivera briefed them on the situation. We're coordinating with the fire department and have units positioned around the neighborhood, she said. But we need your help to end this safely. What kind of help? Tommy asked. We need Carlos to make his move, Detective Rivera replied. And when he does, we need to be ready. The plan they developed was risky but necessary. Maria would appear to leave the clubhouse alone, driving to a predetermined location where undercover officers would be waiting. The hope was that Carlos would follow her, allowing police to arrest him away from the clubhouse and any innocent bystanders. I don't like using Maria as bait, Big Mike said firmly. Neither do I, Detective Rivera admitted. But if Carlos is planning to attack the clubhouse, we need to draw him away from here. There are too many people who could get hurt. Maria, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. I'll do it. Maria, no, Big Mike protested. It's too dangerous. It's dangerous for everyone as long as Carlos is free, she replied. If I can help end this, I have to try. The plan was set for Sunday evening. Maria would leave the clubhouse at 8 o'clock, driving her own car to a shopping center across town. Undercover officers would be positioned throughout the area, and patrol units would be ready to move in the moment Carlos showed himself. Sunday came with unseasonably warm weather. Maria spent the day in the kitchen, but everyone could see she was nervous. Her usual easy conversation was replaced by quiet focus, and she kept glancing at the clock. At 7:30, Big Mike pulled her aside. You don't have to do this, Maria. We can find another way. There is no other way, she said simply. Carlos won't stop until someone stops him. At exactly 8 o'clock, Maria walked out of the clubhouse and got into her car. Several members watched from the windows as she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the evening traffic. What happened next surprised everyone involved. Instead of following Maria, Carlos attacked the clubhouse directly. He had been watching from a distance and realized that Maria leaving alone was probably a trap. So he decided to strike while most of the Hells Angels were presumably away protecting her. The first Molotov cocktail crashed through the front window at 8:15. The second one hit the side of the building 30 seconds later. Carlos had positioned himself across the street with a bag full of homemade bombs, planning to burn the clubhouse to the ground. But Carlos had made a critical error in his planning. He assumed that Big Mike and most of the members had gone with Maria. In reality, only 2 members had left as part of the protection detail. The rest were still inside, and they responded immediately to the attack. As flames began spreading across the front room, Big Mike kicked open the back door and led his members outside. Instead of evacuating completely, they circled around the building to confront Carlos. "There he is," Razor shouted, pointing across the street where Carlos was lighting another bottle. Big Mike called Detective Rivera immediately. "He's here. He's throwing firebombs at the clubhouse." "We're 2 minutes out," Detective Rivera replied. "Don't engage directly." But Carlos saw the Hells Angels coming toward him and panicked. He threw his remaining Molotov cocktails wildly, one landing in the street and another hitting a parked car. Then he ran toward his Camaro, fumbling with his keys. Big Mike could have easily caught Carlos before he reached his car. His younger legs and fury would have made short work of the smaller man. But instead of pursuing him physically, Big Mike did something that shocked everyone present. He stopped running and called out across the street, "Carlos, stop running and face this like a man." Carlos, who had just gotten his car door open, turned to look at Big Mike. For a moment, the 2 men stared at each other across the smoky street. "You want to hurt Maria?" Big Mike continued. "Then you deal with me first." Carlos's face twisted with rage. Instead of getting in his car and driving away, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. The blade glinted in the light from the burning building as he started walking back toward Big Mike. "Mike, don't," Tommy shouted. "He's got a weapon." But Big Mike stood his ground, his hands open at his sides. "Maria doesn't deserve what you've done to her," he told Carlos as the man approached with the knife. "And she doesn't deserve to live in fear because you can't handle being told no. She belongs to me." Carlos screamed, raising the knife above his head. That's when Detective Rivera's backup arrived. 3 police cars screeched into the street simultaneously, their sirens wailing and lights flashing. Officers jumped out with weapons drawn, shouting commands for Carlos to drop the knife. Faced with overwhelming force, Carlos finally realized his situation was hopeless. He dropped the knife and fell to his knees in the middle of the street, crying and ranting about how Maria had ruined his life. As the officers handcuffed Carlos and read him his rights, Big Mike turned to look at the clubhouse. The fire department had arrived and was already working to put out the flames, but significant damage had been done to the front of the building. "Your place is going to need major repairs," Detective Rivera said, joining Big Mike as they watched the firefighters work. "Buildings can be rebuilt," Big Mike replied. "Maria's going to be safe now." "That's what matters." Detective Rivera nodded, then looked at Big Mike with newfound respect. "You could have killed him when he came at you with that knife. Why didn't you?" Big Mike was quiet for a moment, watching as Carlos was loaded into the back of a police car. "Because Maria asked me to do this the right way," he finally said. "And Maria deserves to have her life back without blood on her hands." The next morning, news crews surrounded the Hells Angels clubhouse, drawn by the unusual story of a motorcycle club working with police to stop domestic violence. The charred front of the building told only part of the story, but reporters were eager to sensationalize what they didn't understand. Big Mike stood in the parking lot, still in the same clothes he had worn during the confrontation with Carlos. He had spent the night at the hospital getting checked for smoke inhalation and giving statements to investigators. "Mr. Anderson," called out a reporter from Channel 7 News, using Big Mike's legal name, "can you tell us why the Hells Angels got involved in what appears to be a domestic dispute?" Big Mike looked at the cameras and microphones pointed in his direction. He had never been comfortable with media attention, but he realized this was an opportunity to tell Maria's story properly. "Maria Santos is family to us," he said simply. "When someone hurts family, you protect them. That's not complicated." "But why involve the police instead of handling it yourselves?" another reporter asked. "Because Maria deserved justice, not revenge," Big Mike replied. "There's a difference." Detective Rivera arrived shortly after the news crews, bringing with her an update on Carlos's charges. Arson, attempted murder, violation of a restraining order, domestic violence, and several weapons charges, she told Big Mike. "He's looking at 20 to 30 years in prison." The detective paused, then added something that surprised him. The district attorney wants to use this case as an example of how community cooperation can help stop domestic violence. They're asking if you'd be willing to speak at a press conference. Big Mike shook his head immediately. This isn't about us looking good. This is about Maria being safe. That's exactly why they want you to speak, Detective Rivera explained. Your approach might encourage other victims to come forward. When Maria arrived at the clubhouse that afternoon, she was shocked by the damage. The front windows were boarded up and the acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air. But what surprised her most was finding Big Mike in the kitchen, attempting to make sandwiches for the members who were helping with cleanup. You're a terrible cook, she said, trying to lighten the mood as she took over sandwich preparation. That's why we need you, Big Mike replied, stepping aside gratefully. As Maria worked, she told him about her night at the safe house where police had kept her during the confrontation. I heard the sirens and saw the smoke, she said. I thought he had killed all of you. Carlos made a lot of threats, Big Mike said, but in the end, he was just a scared man who didn't know how to handle his problems. Maria was quiet for several minutes, assembling sandwiches with practiced efficiency. Finally, she spoke again. I never thanked you properly. For what? For believing me when I told you what Carlos was doing. For not just beating him up and making things worse. For showing me that there was a way out that didn't involve more violence. Big Mike sat down at the kitchen counter, accepting a sandwich from Maria. You thanked me by being brave enough to trust the system. That took more courage than anything I did. Over the following weeks, the clubhouse was repaired and renovated. The insurance company initially balked at paying the claim, arguing that the Hells Angels had somehow brought the attack on themselves. But Detective Rivera's detailed report, combined with security footage from neighboring businesses, made it clear that Carlos alone was responsible for the arson. During the renovation, Maria continued cooking for the members, working out of a borrowed kitchen at a community center nearby. The temporary arrangement actually brought her closer to the neighborhood, and several local families began asking if she would cater their events. You could start your own catering business, Big Mike suggested one afternoon as they watched her efficiently prepare a meal for 40 people in the small community center kitchen. I don't know anything about running a business, Maria replied. You know about cooking, and you know about working hard, Big Mike said. The rest can be learned. 3 months after Carlos's arrest, Maria opened Santos Catering in a small storefront across town. Her first major client was the Hells Angels, who hired her to cater their annual charity ride for children's hospitals. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that a domestic violence survivor was now running her own successful business with the support of a motorcycle club. Carlos's trial began 6 months later. Maria testified about the abuse she had suffered, her voice strong and clear as she described both the physical violence and the emotional manipulation that had trapped her in the relationship. When the defense attorney suggested that Maria had exaggerated the extent of Carlos's threats, Detective Rivera took the stand with a box full of evidence, photos of Maria's bruises, recordings of Carlos's threatening phone calls, and security footage of him buying materials for the Molotov cocktails painted a clear picture of escalating violence. Big Mike was called as a witness, and his testimony surprised many people in the courtroom. Instead of portraying himself as a hero, he spoke about Maria's courage and strength. Maria could have stayed quiet and hoped the problem would go away, he testified. Instead, she chose to trust people to help her, even though she was scared. That's not the action of a victim. That's the action of a survivor. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges. Carlos was sentenced to 25 years in prison, without the possibility of parole for 15 years. After the sentencing, Maria stood outside the courthouse with Big Mike and Detective Rivera. Reporters again tried to get interviews, but all three declined to comment, beyond expressing satisfaction with the verdict. What happens now? Maria asked as they walked to their cars. Now you live your life, Big Mike replied, without looking over your shoulder, without being afraid, without anyone telling you what you can and can't do. That evening, the Hells Angels held a celebration at their newly renovated clubhouse. It wasn't a party to celebrate Carlos's imprisonment, but rather a celebration of Maria's freedom and new beginning. As the evening wound down, Maria found herself alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after the party. Big Mike joined her, drying dishes as he had done that first morning when she finally told him the truth about her bruises. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't noticed the marks on my face?" Maria asked. Big Mike considered this for a moment. "I think someone else would have noticed eventually. People who care about you always notice when you're being hurt. But would they have done something about it?" "I'd like to think so," Big Mike replied. "But I'm glad we didn't have to find out." 2 years after Carlos's sentencing, Maria's catering business had grown beyond anything she had imagined possible. She employed 6 people, operated out of a fully equipped commercial kitchen, and had a waiting list of clients that stretched months into the future. Her success story had been featured in local business magazines and earned her recognition from the Small Business Association, but the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Oakland Police Department invited Maria to speak at their annual Domestic Violence Awareness Conference. Standing before an audience of officers, social workers, and advocates, she told her story with a confidence that would have been impossible during her darkest days with Carlos. "I want to talk about the moment everything changed for me," Maria said, looking out at the packed auditorium. "It wasn't when I finally left Carlos or when I got the restraining order, or even when he was arrested. It was when someone noticed I was being hurt and refused to pretend they didn't see it." In the audience, Big Mike sat in the back row, wearing a suit instead of his usual leather vest. Beside him sat Detective Rivera, who had been promoted to sergeant following her excellent work on several high-profile cases. "Big Mike could have handled my situation the way people might expect a Hell's Angel to handle it," Maria continued. "But instead he showed me that there was a path to safety that didn't require more violence. He taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." After her speech, Maria was approached by dozens of people. Social workers wanted to know how to encourage more victims to come forward. Police officers asked about building trust with vulnerable communities. Other survivors shared their own stories and thanked her for giving them hope. But the conversation that meant the most to Maria came from a young woman named Jessica, who was barely 20 years old with bruises she tried to hide under heavy makeup. "My boyfriend says no one will believe me if I report him," Jessica whispered. "He says I'm worthless and no one cares what happens to me." Maria sat down with Jessica in a quiet corner of the conference center. "5 years ago I believed those same lies," she said gently. "But here's what I learned. There are people who will believe you, who will help you, and who will stand with you when you're ready to stand up for yourself." She gave Jessica Detective Rivera's card and her own business number. "Call either of us when you're ready," she said. "And if you're not ready today, call us when you are. We'll be here." 6 months later, Jessica called. With Maria's support and Detective Rivera's guidance, she successfully left her abusive relationship and started rebuilding her life. She became the first person to benefit from what would eventually become known as the Maria Santos Protocol, a comprehensive approach to domestic violence cases that emphasized community support alongside legal intervention. The protocol, developed jointly by the Oakland Police Department and local advocacy groups, required officers to connect domestic violence victims with community mentors who had survived similar situations. The program's success rate was remarkable, with over 80% of participants successfully escaping abusive relationships without returning to their abusers. Big Mike's role in developing the protocol was initially met with skepticism from some community leaders who couldn't understand how a motorcycle club could contribute to domestic violence prevention, but his practical insights proved invaluable. "Abusers isolate their victims," he explained to a room full of social workers and police administrators. "They make their victims believe they have nowhere to turn. But if you can show a victim that they have a community, a family that will stand with them, suddenly they're not alone anymore." The Hells Angels Oakland chapter formally partnered with several women's shelters, providing security escorts for women moving out of dangerous situations and fundraising for programs that helped survivors become financially independent. The arrangement was unusual, but it worked. Maria often reflected on how much her life had changed since that Tuesday morning, when Big Mike first noticed the marks on her face. Her catering business now employed 12 people, including 3 other domestic violence survivors who had found their way to her through various support networks. One spring afternoon, as Maria was preparing for a large wedding reception, she received an unexpected visitor at her commercial kitchen. A woman in her 50s, well-dressed but nervous, approached the counter where Maria was reviewing orders. "Are you Maria Santos?" the woman asked quietly. "Yes, can I help you?" The woman looked around the busy kitchen, then back at Maria. My name is Linda Martinez. My daughter was... She was in a situation like yours was. She saw you speak at the police conference last year. Maria set down her clipboard, giving the woman her full attention. What can I do for you? My daughter followed your advice. She got help, left her boyfriend, started over, but Linda's voice broke slightly. She was killed by her ex-boyfriend 3 months ago. He violated his restraining order and shot her outside her new apartment. Maria felt her heart sink. This was the harsh reality that haunted everyone who worked in domestic violence prevention. Not every story had a happy ending. I'm so sorry for your loss, Maria said, reaching across the counter to touch Linda's hand. I came here because I wanted to thank you, Linda continued, tears flowing freely now. For the 3 months between when she left him and when he killed her, my daughter was happier than she had been in years. She had hope. She believed her life could be different. That's because of you. Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a check. My daughter left some money and I want to use it to help other women the way you helped her. I don't know how to do what you do, but I want to contribute. The check was for $50,000. With Linda's donation, Maria established the Elena Martinez Foundation, named after Linda's daughter. The foundation provided emergency financial assistance to domestic violence survivors, helping them with security deposits for new apartments, job training programs, and childcare while they rebuilt their lives. Big Mike served on the foundation's board of directors, a role that required him to attend meetings in corporate boardrooms and speak at fundraising events. The sight of a Hells Angels president in a business suit discussing domestic violence policy never failed to turn heads, but his commitment to the cause was unwavering. People see the leather vest and the motorcycle and they make assumptions, he said during one particularly successful fundraising dinner. But protecting people who can't protect themselves isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about what you're willing to do when someone needs help. Detective Rivera, now a captain, often spoke about the Maria Santos case as a turning point in how law enforcement approached community partnerships. We learned that sometimes the help victims need comes from unexpected places, she would tell new recruits. Our job isn't to judge who's offering help, but to make sure that help is effective and legal. 5 years after Carlos's conviction, Maria received a letter forwarded through the prison system. Carlos was asking for her forgiveness and claiming he had found religion behind bars. The letter detailed his participation in anger management programs and his desire to make amends for his actions. Maria showed the letter to Big Mike, who read it without comment before handing it back to her. What do you think I should do? She asked. That's entirely up to you, Big Mike replied. But remember that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for him. Don't feel obligated to respond just because he asked. Maria ultimately chose not to respond to the letter, but she didn't throw it away either. She filed it with other documents from that period of her life, part of a story that had shaped her but no longer defined her. On the 10th anniversary of the night Carlos attacked the clubhouse, the Hells Angels Oakland chapter held a memorial ride, but instead of commemorating the violence, they rode to raise money for domestic violence shelters throughout the Bay Area. Maria led the procession on her own motorcycle, a skill she had learned in the years following her liberation from Carlos. As the riders gathered in the parking lot before departure, Big Mike looked around at the group. There were members from several motorcycle clubs, police officers, social workers, and dozens of domestic violence survivors who had found strength through Maria's example. 10 years ago, we thought we were just helping one woman, he told the assembled crowd. Today we know we were starting a movement. Maria revved her motorcycle engine and smiled at the man who had refused to ignore the marks on her face all those years ago. Behind them, the renovated clubhouse stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal. The ride that day raised over $100,000 for domestic violence prevention programs. But more importantly, it demonstrated that courage could inspire others to be courageous, that one person's decision to seek help could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. As the motorcycles pulled out onto the street, their engines roaring in harmony, Maria thought about all the women who might be watching from windows or sidewalks, wondering if they too could find the strength to ask for help. She hoped her story would reach them, hoped they would know that somewhere out there people were ready to stand with them when they were ready to stand up for themselves.